They brought me out here to start the second half. I'm going to start by reading you a poem. I usually do the poem every year, and usually I read Omar Khayyam. So I decided to switch it up this year, and I'm going to read the first ghazal from Hafez. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to read the poem in the original Farsi. I'm not going to exactly translate it, but I'm going to go through one possible interpretation. One, I think it'll be a little bit more interesting than just hearing my amateur Persian and even more amateur Arabic. And that way also the people that don't speak Farsi can kind of get an idea what the poem is talking about. But I do want to emphasize that I'm using one possible interpretation. There's been, from the day that Hafez lived, there's been a lot of debate about who Hafez really was and what the meaning of his poem was. So there's definitely a lot of people that would give you a completely different interpretation. And I'm not trying to pass mine off as the correct one, but it's the one that I tend to find the most appealing. And it's an interpretation of Hafez as a sort of mystic or spiritual person. And there are other interpretations that see him as more of a worldly type of a guy. But with that, I'll read a few lines, go through the possible interpretation, read a few lines, go through the interpretation, and I'll go through the poem that way. So, without further ado, I'll read the first. This is the first ghazal from Hafez's Divan. Allah ya ayyuha as-sari idar kasan wa nawilha که عشق آسان نمود اول ولی افتاد مشکل ها به بوی نافه‌ای که آخر صبا زان طوره بگشاید ز تاب جد مشکینش چه خون افتاد در دلها. So the first two lines are something in Persian poetry called molammat. Molammat means kind of like two, because the first line is in Arabic and the second line is in Persian, and the poem takes off in Persian from there. Hafez in Arabic means, well, the root hafadha means to do with protection or safety or safeguarding. And Hafez was a title that they give to people who had memorized the Quran, because those were the people at the time with a lot of old transmission of traditions who would safeguard the Quran and other traditions by memorizing it. And Hafez, we don't know much about his life, but since he was called Hafez, we can presume he probably memorized the Quran at an early age. And so he did have a wide knowledge of Arabic as well as Persian. And he starts the poem off by saying, oh, Saqi. Saqi is the figure who pours the wine. Bring me the cup. But if you notice, the word that he uses for bring isn't the traditional word that's commonly used in Arabic for bring. The word idr actually comes from the same root as dayere, circle. So it kind of gives a connotation of continuity. And so in this interpretation, that kind of cues you in that this cup of wine he's talking about, it may not necessarily be a physical glass of wine. It might be something deeper that he's hinting at. In the next line he says, love seemed easy at first, but then the problems came. And again, here he might be using the imagery of romantic love to hint at something deeper. But romantic love makes a really nice analogy, because in romantic attraction, usually the first thing that you notice is the physical appearance of someone else. And so you may fall in love with somebody or think you've fallen in love with somebody, but it usually isn't that easy, is it? And so it says, love seemed easy at first, but then came the problems. And that's the way that romantic love often goes, but that's also the way that a lot of things in life turn out. And he continues on with the imagery of a beloved and describing her curly locks of hair and saying how the blood started pouring from his heart. And I know some scholars have talked about, the curliness of the hair as being imagery of the complexity of the world and everything in it. Hafez continues, مرا در منزل جانان چه امن و عیش چون هر دم جرس فریاد می‌دارد که بربندید محمل‌ها. Okay, so he starts off by saying in the houses of Janan. And a lot of commentators feel that by Manzil Janan, he means this world. He means the physical world. And he says, what security or comfort is there when every so often, Jaras faryad midorad. Jaras was the name of these bells or rings that they would attach to the head camel in a caravan when they were crossing the desert. Because oftentimes with these caravans, they'd have all these camels lined up walking with each other. And they'd occasionally make stops for water or rest in the middle of the desert. But once the lead camel would start moving again, the bells on the camel would start ringing, and all the people behind in the caravan, when they heard those bells ringing, they knew it was time to wrap their things together and get going. Here, Hafez is using that imagery, possibly to hint at something that happens in life. Things change, seasons come and go, times change, and maybe it's time for you to move on. And the word he actually uses for camel here, he says, Kebar bandid mahmel ha. The word in Persian for camel that they usually use is shotor. Even in Arabic, the word that they usually use is jama, which means beautiful. But here he uses the word mahmel, which comes from the root hamalla, which means to bear or to carry. So if you know, like the word hamileh means pregnant in Persian, because you're carrying or you're bearing the child. So mahmel comes from the same root, and it means camel in Arabic. It's a more obscure word, and it refers to the fact that the camel bears the burden of most of the baggages and whatever else that you've attached to the camel and you're carrying through the desert. But it's using that imagery because you're moving on, there's a certain burden that comes with that, there's a certain effort that you have to pick your stuff up and move on. And so it's interesting that he's using those choice of words to convey that imagery. Continuing, Hafez says, Be may sajjade rangin kon, garat pir moqan goyad, ke salek bi khabar nabud ze rah o rasm manzil ha. So here he says, pray with wine if Pir Moqan tells you. Now, Moqan was a pre-Islamic religious position in the Zoroastrian community. It was like a Zoroastrian priest. Here, Hafez is using the word Moqan as kind of a symbol of Insan Kamel, like the perfect person or the perfect guide or the wise one. And he says, if they're telling you to pray with wine, something that is forbidden in Islam, then do it, because these people know and they understand the path. And so what he's trying to convey is sometimes when wisdom comes to you, it may conflict with your traditional beliefs or thoughts, but you have to be able to let go of that, because the place that this wisdom is coming from, they've been on this path before. They know things that you haven't experienced yet. Hafez continues, شب تاریک و بیم موج و گردابی چنین هاید کجا دانند حال ما سابق باران ساحل ها. So here, the first line, he starts off saying, a dark night, fear of the waves, whirlpools that are terrifying. So he's using this imagery of all the dangers that could be present out at sea. But again, he's using this as a symbol of all the emotional turmoil, all the problems that people go through in their own journey through their sea of life. And he says, those taking it easy on the beach, what do they know about our condition? Us who are going through that turmoil and that up and down. It was interesting, I was watching a discussion between two professors in Iran on this line. And one of them asked them, he says, there's two interpretations of these people taking it easy on the beach. One is that these people have already gone out to sea and they've come back, and so it's easy for them now. Another interpretation is that these are people who've never left the beach before. They don't know anything about the dangers. And the other professor replied, hey, I'll go with your second interpretation. I reject the first one. And he actually cited traditions in Islam that talk about how even prophets and imams, people that were supposed to be almost perfect human beings, even in their own traditions, they talk about how these people had emotional problems, they'd have bad thoughts and things like that they had to deal with. So in that respect, they were just like everybody else. And so he says, he's of the opinion that these people taking it easy on the beach, these are people who really haven't reflected on life and thought about where they're going. They're just where they are and they're comfortable, and they're just taking it easy on the beach. And they haven't been out to sea. And so they don't know what Hafez is talking about. And so Hafez continues, همه کارم ز خود کامی به بدنامی کشید آخر نهان کی ماند آن رازی که از او سازند محفلها. So here Hafez is talking about how his frustration with the fact that he can't keep his own secrets a secret, and it ends up spilling out. But one thing that should be known about Hafez is part of the reason why there's so much debate around his poetry and his writing is because not much was known about him. He's a person who preferred to live in solitude. And with these mystical writers in Iran, there's generally kind of two classes that they fall in. One is these people that, sometimes they call them the drunken mystics because they were very loud. They like to share their love with everybody. They like to dance. They like to really show off. And then there's other people that they'll go through the same experiences and write about the same topics, but they're a little bit more introverted and withdrawn, and they prefer to keep to solitude and secrecy. And sometimes there's been debates between these two camps, back and forth between which is more appropriate. And if you look at Hafez's writing, you can definitely make a case that he was the type of person that preferred to be in solitude. And Hafez finishes up this ghazal saying, حضوری گر همی خواهی از او غایب مشو حافظ متى ما تلق من تحوى دع الدنيا واهملها. So the first line he says, presently, if you want to reach that which you love, Hafez. So he uses the word presently. And here there's two possible meanings that we can draw from that. One is presently, he means in this moment, at this time. Well, the present is the most relevant moment. I mean, the present in some sense is all you have. In another sense, I saw one professor talking about something in Farsi that's called ilm huzuri. So a lot of knowledge we have is mediated by symbols and figures. So if I write to you a letter, and in the letter I write the word cat, you understand what a cat is, you have some knowledge of it, but the way I'm conveying the idea of cat to you is through a symbol, through the word cat. But when you see that symbol, that ignites the idea of what a cat is. So ilm huzuri, present knowledge, refers to a knowledge that's not mediated by any symbol. So the direct experience of the concept of the cat, as opposed to the word cat, which is a symbolic representation of that knowledge. So he's saying if you want to reach it, you have to really be present with it, not reasoning through symbols, but be directly present with that experience that you want to have. And the last line that is, again, modan mat, because it's one line in Persian, one line in Arabic. He finishes in Arabic just as he started in Arabic. And he says, when you have found that which you love, let go of the world and all of its contents. And to finish up, I'll just read another 4 lines from Hafez. Since one of the things we talked about is the fact that Hafez preferred to kind of keep his life a little bit secret. These are 4 lines. These are 4 lines that some people think may have been addressed at Hallaj. And Mansur Hallaj was another mystic poet type of a guy. And Hafez has a lot of respect for him, but he was the opposite in the sense that he loved to proclaim his love and mystical ideas and everything to everyone. And he got in a lot of trouble for that. And the mullahs weren't so happy with that, and he ended up getting executed. And so Hafez kind of leaves him with this warning. He says, don't tell everybody your secrets, but at the end he says, still fall in love, because that's all you have in this world. And one of the things Hallaj actually said before he was executed was he said, Ana al-haq, which in Arabic means, I am the truth. And the truth is actually one of God's epithets. So a lot of people thought he was trying to say, like, hey, I'm God. the mystic understands that he meant something deeper by that. What he meant was, I've gotten past myself. I've gotten past myself so far that I don't recognize myself as being a separate existence. All I see is God. He wasn't trying to say, I am God. And so Hafez says, با مدعی مگویید اسرار عشق و مستی تا بی خبر بمیرد در رنج خود پرستی عاشق شد ارنه روزی کار جهان سرآید ناخوانده نقش مقصود از کارگاه هستی. Thank you.
Thank you, Nogin, for those beautiful words. Our next act is Karan Daryani, who's going to be playing the guitar and singing.
Hi everyone. I was actually told I need to talk right now. Sorry, just wrote something. My name is Karan, and I'm going to perform 3 songs for you on the guitar. I hope you had a really, I'm really sorry, I'm really good. I hope you had a really great night so far. I mean, it was more like a music festival, people dancing, singing, and all that. So I'm kind of embarrassed because I'm going to mess everything up. What's next? Right, so I was going to say that it's a really big responsibility to end the show on me, but yeah, I think I have no option.
Right, please.
Right, this is a really big stage for one person playing, so I'm kind of, as I said, nervous. And they say you have to walk around the whole stage a couple of times, talk to people, and it's going to help it. And I have to say something, so I just kind of talk about myself. I'm a grad student at UT, and as a typical Persian, I had 3 options to be a lawyer, an engineer, and a doctor. So I chose engineering, but I always did singing, I always loved music, and whenever I found no one is at home, I used to sing so no one can hear me. I mostly in the shower, sometimes in the closet. But yeah, that sometimes made me happy, so I guess trying to make you happy as well if I can. I'll try my best. And right, so yeah, it actually feels better right now. 3 songs I have prepared for you. The first one is my warm-up. Probably most of you haven't heard it. It's like Monsen Yeganet, Eskelet, which is a really short song, and I always start my singing with that one because it's like something I always practice people who I play for. They already know. The second one, however, is your warm-up, and you're going to sing along like gently if you want. So you won't be so shy for the person that is sitting next to you. And the third one, as you can see on the list, is everyone knows that. And I'm hoping that everyone is going to sing along because I'll probably be too tired by the last one time. And oh, I got a cold and it was just getting worse. And if my voice all of a sudden goes off Lucy, you can laugh if you want. That's just, you're here for the entertainment anyway. So thank you very much. Actually shaking, I don't know why.
یهوی موجی اومد و قایق و کن از اسکله قایق من آواره شد الان یه عمر تو گله اسکله ناز چشم حریم هم نقای هم تو ساعت یه روکش عقبه یه دمای هم گردی یه دستای تو رو بسن تو دنیا نمیرم هر وقت که عمرم تو بودی بی کسی رو نفهمیدم تو بنده دل سلولش حفظ نگاه تو میکشم ولی بازم رو میره عکس چشاتو میکشم آی قصه بی سراتم چرا بدون قافیه برای مرگ این صدا نبودن تو کافیه
So the next song is from Kurusha, Moye Golaya, and I think most of you have story. Most of you have memories with this, and I hope your memories get even better.
قمیونه دوتا چشمون قشنگت لونه کرده شب تو موهای سیاهت خونه کرده دوتا چشمون سیاهت مثل شبهای سیاهی های دو چشمت مثل لبهای وقتی بغزت مجه ها